Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Tina Walia, and I am pleased to be your host today. This evening, we continue our health and wellness journey with our webinar, Breaking the Chains of Addiction. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Peter Selby, explores the latest concepts in understanding addiction. The Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, or TRIVO, was founded by Dr. Sudhi Devanesan and Mr. Ravi Juneja in 2009. TRIVO's mission is to create healthy communities through education. One of our main goals is to inspire change at a personal level. Think of it as a ripple effect, a drop of information that challenges the status quo and spreads in ever widening circles to make a positive influence and generate significant results. The Webinar Outreach Wing, or WOW, is a branch of Trivo, and we have been serving our community for well over 6 years. We host a number of webinars throughout the year by inviting leading medical experts to empower and educate our audience. Dr. Sudhi Devanesan is the president of Trivo. Dr. Devanesan, or fondly referred to as Dr. D, is a family medicine physician, an educator, and a public health activist. He was inducted as a member of the Order of Canada in 2001 for his role in health and prevention of heart disease among South Asians. He has also been the chief of Department of Family and Community Medicine at St. Michael's Hospital. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Sudhi Devanesan.
Thank you very much, Tina, for that introduction, and welcome everybody to this wonderful webinar. Yet another great achievement. And I want to thank Dr. Peter Selby for accepting our invitation this evening to speak, and to the WOW team for the hard work they've put in, and for our ambassadors who have gone out into the community, putting up the posters, etc. A lot of hard work. So thank you all very, very much. So we look forward to an active year this year. We're looking forward to having a golf tournament and another gala, and we will have further webinars in the fall. We will also be doing something with the youth, very exciting indeed, and that more information is forthcoming very shortly. So I want to introduce you to an interesting word. The word is melmastia. Melmastia. Melmastia is a noun from Pashto, or the Pashtun people's language. And it is a cherished value that the Pashtun tribes uphold. And that is to welcome and take care of strangers, people in trouble, people, their own neighbors and wanderers, etc. Here in Canada, we have a great opportunity for Melmastia. We have refugees, we have new immigrants, we have people in different areas, our own neighbors. Sometimes we don't even know them. Particularly in apartments, we won't know who's next door to us. But that extreme value or cherished value of taking care of your neighbors, taking care of strangers, new people in an extreme fashion, even protecting them, feeding them, that word is melmastia. So enjoy this evening, enjoy the webinar, and thank you once again, Tina. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhi, for continuing to enhance our vocabulary with this new word. I would like to remind the audience about the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So please submit your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Dr. Peter Selby, senior scientist and senior medical consultant at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH, is also the vice chair research and Giblon professor in family medicine research at the University of Toronto. please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Peter Selby. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Selby.
Thank you very much, Tina, and thank you, Dr. D, for sharing that lovely word with us, and I can't agree with you more. Thank you so much to all of you for inviting me to speak with you today. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to just make sure I share my screen, and the right screen that is. And I'm going to make sure that you can actually see the right one. I think you're seeing the right screen. And just if I can get a show of, I can't see people, but can people see the screen? Somebody just let me know if you can. Okay, wonderful. Yes, wonderful. So what I'm going to do is just go over, I have slides, and I do want to make sure that this is an interactive session. I know it's the end of the day. And it's really difficult because there's distance between us. I usually present face-to-face to people, and I feel that sometimes Zoom creates this unnecessary distance. And so what I'm going to invite all of you to do, if it's possible, is for you to use the chat feature to interact, because I will be looking at the chat as I'm presenting. I'm okay with, I feed off your questions, and I'll adapt my talk as I go along. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that this hour that you're spending with us or more you find it useful to you. So let's go ahead. I'll do my disclosures first, which is always something that an academic should do, so you know what my potential biases might be. I have been fortunate to receive a lot of grants, and these grants come from mostly peer-reviewed grants and through the Government of Canada and other peer-reviewed agencies with funding through them. I have done some speaking engagements for some pharmaceutical companies, but clearly as an invited guest, not on behalf of them. I do consulting fees. I've consulted with several companies to bring new medications to Canada for the treatment of addictions. And the other thing is that I run a large program for tobacco addiction in the province. And for that, we go through an open tender process, and we get medications at a discounted price from all the manufacturers reputable manufacturers that make medications. So Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, and Pfizer. However, no industry funding from tobacco, vaping, or alcohol, food. And that might become apparent because today's talk is about addiction as a disorder of consumption. So moving right along, I want to start by where I'm at. And, as somebody who has immigrated to this country and has been fortunate and blessed to be able to really be successful here, during my journey in the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to visit several Indigenous communities, First Nations. And what struck me was the amount of disparity, and it brought back many memories of my work in remote and destitute parts of India, where things were just not the same. And it was really shocking to me that a country like Canada would have communities hidden from sight who are really living in third world conditions with third world diseases, third world conditions. And so it took me a while to spend some time to understand what lay below it. And so today's land acknowledgement comes from my hospital where I work, which is the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, but really understand that we are here, that there was a long history before us over here. And this long history goes back for millennia. And yes, Toronto is covered by a Toronto Purchase Treaty, number 13 of 1805 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And it is now home to a vast diversity of First Nations. So it's all very well to do these land acknowledgements before presentations, but it's really important to be committed to actually have action steps towards reconciliation. And so, yes, we do this, we reflect on it, but what is more important is we understand that there are more than one way of getting better. And so we embrace that there are traditional healing ways in which people got them better, and we weave them into our practices depending on where the person's at. So that's the land acknowledgement. But what I also want to make sure is that you understand that through my lab, we have really committed in the last 20 years to do things that really help reconcile some of the issues. And tobacco as a sacred plant has been completely taken and made into addictive plant. And you can see the same thing has happened with other drugs of abuse, like coca leaf is used for very medicinal purposes, but is then taken out, extracted, made into cocaine, made into crack, and then misused. And so tobacco is no different. It's had the same kind of history and is a traditional medicine, is a traditional, it's for ceremonial purposes. So we really worked with several First Nations to create training and with them and by them so that they can create toolkits to help reclaim the ceremonial use of tobacco and get away from commercial use of tobacco, which disproportionately kills Indigenous people. Even though they don't smoke as many cigarettes, they die much faster from those cigarettes. We also work with the Inuit. Similarly, it's a completely, tobacco does not grow above the 60th parallel, but these are addictions that have been imported in and completely are supplied by a commercial enterprise. So we work with the government of Nunavut as well to offer trainings and adapt materials. And then we work with implementation of programming within these organizations. So that's just to give you a background from where I sit. And then let's get into the topic of today, which is the learning objectives. So I'll tell you what it's not about. So let's talk about what it is about, and then I'll tell you what it's not about. So we're going to investigate the nature of addiction. And given that this audience is from all over the world, I understand, and has a different appreciation, I thought it was important for us not to spend time talking about the nitty-gritty about each drug, but really speak to the process of what addiction, because if you actually look at this issue of a disorder of consumption, then this construct of addiction helps us understand why, under circumstances, we may overconsume anything that is pleasurable, whether it's food or entertainment or swiping on the phone or whatever it might be. If we understand this nature of how consumption can get disordered, then we can definitely understand one aspect of the nature of addiction. We'll then spend some time talking about what the options are, and if people are not willing or ready or able to stop, can we figure out a way to reduce the harm to them while we work with them to get them ready? And lastly, we'll complete it with how a loved one can help others experiencing addictions. And one of the things you notice in addictions is often the family is ready first before the person is ready. And often the family is seeking help. So one of the things that you recognize, and some of you may be having this your own experience, is that this is one of those conditions where even if the person who's using is suffering from the addiction, they are not the only ones suffering from the addiction. Other family members also suffer, even if they aren't using. And so the family members get desperate, want to have help, want to help the person, but they have their own distress. And we'll talk a little bit about how one might do this. So this talk is not really about each individual drug, because I think we wouldn't have, they could spend a whole day talking about the pharmacology and which drug does what and why and how, but we will take some of those in questions. And we will talk about, sort of general principles about each of the substances. And I can already see some questions coming in, so I appreciate that. And I'll definitely weave that in into the talk. So thank you, Mita, for that. All right, moving right along. A bit of a warning. So, this discussion might be upsetting to somebody, or triggering to some here, because you either having your own substance use issues or you've had family members with substance use issues. What I'm going to ask you is that if it is getting too much, please feel to take a break, reach out to someone close to you or the helpline in your region. I know I can offer you sort of, help in Toronto, but you should be in Toronto, but do type into the chat as we go along just to express your thoughts. And again, if you do feel triggered, please take time to take a break. All right. So let's investigate the nature of addiction. So one of the things I'm going to now ask each of you to type into is this. What does addiction mean to you? Just don't think about it. Just start typing into the chat, and we'll just take it from there. What does addiction mean to you? So Christopher says it's a solution. Others, uncontrollable urge to indulge. So we've got it's a solution to a problem. A dependency. We're hearing the word dependency a couple of times from Kate and Nicole. Becoming a slave from Balakrishna. Oh, wow, this is really going a vicious cycle. The drug controls you. Unable to stop a certain activity. Thank you, Ayush, for that. Other things. An excessive reliance on something. Yeah, Shami, that's it. Overindulgence, Smita says. Anything else that's coming to mind? Cannot stop using, thinking things will be better, feeling pain. Interesting. That's the first time Lois is putting in feeling pain, because sometimes that solution is sometimes people are looking at managing pain and losing identity, impact on quality of life. A depressive effect, absolutely. Some drugs are stimulants, some are depressive. Isolation, exactly. Addiction becomes a very isolating condition. So these are all the images, and Jambavan says a weakness of the mind, and I think we'll unpack what that means. And whether it's the weakness of the mind or it's a weakened mind is something that we struggle with, but we all definitely will do that. Now, I'm not sure if the chat is open to everybody can see it, or the chat just coming to the hosts and panelists, but I would encourage you to make sure if it's possible, I don't know if it's possible, but if it's possible to chat to everybody, that's great. If not, I'll keep saying them out loud. So, okay, so that's great. Thank you for that. So you can see, this reminds me of this story of people coming upon, this is a parable or story that exists in almost every continent where there are elephants. But the story is about people who are blind or can't see come upon this elephant, and they each touch a different part of the elephant, and then an argument breaks out because each one thinks they're right. The man, holding the tail thinks it's a rope and is convinced it's a rope and tells everybody this is a rope. Somebody else touching the trunk thinks it's the tree trunk of a tree and is convinced it's a tree trunk. And the person holding the trunk of the elephant itself thinks it's a snake. And so nobody can agree what it is. And addiction is a lot like that. So if you come to this from the spiritual mindset, you'll say, well, it's a spiritual breakdown, and therefore this person is broken and they're weak and what have you. And on the other hand, if you come to it from the biological perspective, we said, okay, there's this deficit in dopamine, there's all these other brain issues going on, and that's the reason. Or if somebody comes to it from an environmental perspective, they'll say, well, this is our environmental factors, it's the availability of drugs, it's the marketing of drugs, whatever. And so somebody else may say it's a psychological deficit. But essentially, everybody is holding on to a small piece of what defines addiction. And what I'm really going to ask us to do is to have that humility to say, we need somebody to step by, take off our blindfolds and take a look at the whole picture. Because addiction is not just one thing. It's a very dynamic thing. So exactly what happened, as you can see in the, in there, that we really need to all come together from different perspectives. And if you notice, that's one of the reasons why I work in family medicine, public health, and psychiatry, because for addictions, for us to address the problems of addiction in society today, you need to have like a mind-body society kind of worldview, because otherwise you're only picking at one aspect of the problem. So what I'm going to do next is, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. How many of you have seen this movie called A Beautiful Boy? It is on Amazon. It's a lovely movie. It's based on a true story of a father and a son. But what I'm going to do is show you a clip just to get us a little bit more real and closer to what addiction might look like. So this addiction going on in the person is presenting here. I'll set up the clip. The son Timothy Shelby has been away from the house, has agreed to meet his father in one of their favorite cafes. And it's about 5 minutes long. We'll play it and then take it from there.
Yeah, I just need a few $100.
Why don't we just have lunch and talk? We can do that, right?
How's Karen and the kids?
Okay. They ask about you. Is there step up next week? And I know they'd love you.
You're guilt tripping me, all right?
No, I'm just saying.
I feel horrible about myself.
I know they wanted you to be there, that's all.
I'm sorry, Dad. I just need some money, all right? So please just give me some money.
Where does this end?
I gotta see this one through. This is kind of working out for me right now. I got 5 days sober.
It doesn't look like it's working out, Nick.
Oh, it doesn't look like it's working out? So what, then
No.
therapy, huh?
You can come home.
No, that
we'll
wouldn't...
make it work, please, Nick. Please. I've been doing some research.
Been doing fucking research? You gotta
No.
be kidding me, Dad.
You think that you have this under control. And I understand how scared you are.
I understand why I do things. It doesn't make me any different, all right? I'm attracted to craziness, and you're just embarrassed because I was like, I was like this amazing thing, like your special creation or something, and you don't like who I am now.
Yeah? Who are you, Nick?
This is me, Dad. Here, this is who I am.
Okay, and the next one is going to go again. This is the beginning of the clip. Sorry, the clip skipped. I'm gonna play it again.
Oh, wow. Hasn't changed at all. This place. Oh, man.
So how you doing?
I'm doing great, just doing what needs to be done,
What does that mean?
and just being responsible for myself, and I've quit on my own, so I got 5 days now. I feel like I'm doing well, but I just need a few $100 though.
Nick, I can't give you any money.
Yeah. Okay. It's just $200. I just need
Oops.
Hey. I'm doing great, just doing what needs to be done, and
What does that mean?
just being responsible for myself, and I've quit on my own, so I got 5 days now. I feel like I'm doing well, but I just need a few $100 though.
Nick, I can't give you any money.
Yeah. Okay. It's just $200. I just need to get some shit together. I want to go to New York.
New York?
Yeah. I need to get out of San Francisco. There's too many. All these fucking bad vibes here all the time. Yeah, I just need a few $100.
Why don't we just have lunch and talk? We can do that, right?
How's Karen and the kids?
Okay. They ask about you. Is there step up next week? And I know they'd love you.
You're guilt tripping me, all right?
No, I'm just saying.
I feel horrible about myself.
I know they wanted you to be there, that's all.
I'm sorry, Dad. I just need some fucking money, all right? So please just give me some
And then
fucking
what?
money.
Where does this end?
I gotta see this one through. This is kind of working out for me right now. I got 5 days sober.
It doesn't look like it's working out, Nick.
Oh, it doesn't look like it's working out? So what, then
No.
therapy, huh?
You can come home.
No, that
we'll
wouldn't...
make it work, please, Nick. please. I've been doing some research.
Been doing fucking research? You gotta
No.
be kidding me, Dad.
You think that you have this under control. And I understand how scared you are.
I understand why I do things. It doesn't make me any different, all right? I'm attracted to craziness, and you're just embarrassed because I was like, I was like this amazing thing, like your special creation or something, and you don't like who I am now.
Yeah? Who are you, Nick?
This is me, Dad. Here, this is who I am. You don't like what you see? The more I think about it, Mom should have gotten custody. Because you always gotta be fucking controlling everything all the time.
You're allowed to be mad at me, Nick. I made mistakes. I understand that. I wish that I hadn't, but I did. But God, what you're saying right now doesn't make any sense.
You're doing this right now. You're fucking controlling me right now.
It is not you, Nick. It is the drugs talking.
What does that even fucking mean?
Psychological terror. It's what addicts do.
What the fuck are you doing right now, huh? What is this? What are you doing, huh? Oh, man. I don't want it to go like this. All right. I should go, Dad.
Let me book your room
No, Dad.
at a hotel for a couple of nights.
Dad.
Why
Dad, I
don't
should
we
go.
just go get some food? Can you say goodbye at
Bye,
least?
Dad.
Okay, that was heavy, and I hope sorry about the little glitch that it looped. But what I want you to now think about is, how are you feeling? And type that into the chat. Yes, thank you, Bhaskaran. You said you felt very sad. And also what you noticed. So depending on what you're feeling, just what you noticed, let's go. It was heartbreaking. What else did you notice or see? I mean, that's frustrated, helpless, yeah, anxious. He's in denial, caregiver burnout, hurt, difficult, broken communication. You could see the love of the father. Absolutely, yeah, that really comes through. Feeling misunderstood. Yeah. What else? What else do you see? You notice two different perspectives of seeing things. Exact conflicting through spirals into a crisis. The father is suffering, hopelessness. Concerned father, but selfish kid. Triggered, brokenness, and crisis. The drug spoke instead of the person. That's a great one there. Yeah, heartbreaking. So you could see how this impacts all of us. You can watch how that communication is broken down, a disconnect, there's blaming. There's this difficult to understand the son, conflict between the emotions and reality, communication breaking down there. Yeah. Yeah. Not ready, but looking for an out, not sure how to ask for it. Distorted views, distorted realities. Yeah. Marie says, thank you for sharing that. It hits too close to home. Anger, resentment, family breakdown. Yeah. I'll wait another minute. With any other comments? But to summarize, what you're seeing and noticing is, this idea that the father wants to get him into something, but he was able to set that limit because the son wanted money. The father knew that wasn't the right thing, but you can see how a parent just seeing their son, who they had seen completely well, doing well, suddenly in this state, wanting to do anything to help them. So these are all natural emotions and desires, but it creates sadness, helplessness, fear, anger sometimes. And so this is you're trapped, right? That psychological terror that you feel like you feel trapped. You want to help, you try to help, but it doesn't work. And the person is not ready, not willing, not able to accept it. So all of these pre-existing relationships of caring are now under stress. They are stretched. And anything under stretch is there's tension. People will pull back and people will pull in. So these things will continue to happen. And interestingly, the father did say that, this is the drug talking, but the son wasn't ready to hear that. So it's really interesting what happens when somebody is in the middle of, we would say, jonesing or craving a drug. There's a singular focus, there's a hijacked mind happening there, that the person who you knew is no longer in front of you, because the singular focus is to get that. And that's what we call the hijacked brain of addiction. And the person will do anything to get. So that's one characteristic of addiction, is doing anything to get the drug. So, okay, so we'll just move on in this, and this feeling of being trapped. Both sides are trapped, and it's an awful place for families to be in, an awful place for the person to be in. And it's very interesting, but it's not hopeless. So let's just take a step back and think about what are the common myths about drugs and drugs of abuse that we have out there. There are drugs that are stimulants, there are drugs that are depressants, there are drugs that hallucinate, there are drugs that are sedative hypnotic, there are drugs that do a mixture of those, there are drugs that give you psychedelic effects. But there are a lot of myths about drug abuse because the history of this idea of attachment and craving is an ancient one. It comes in all mythologies, and it's this issue of our basic human. It's that we get attached to things. And that attachment, when it becomes problematic, can lead to addiction. But there are lots of myths about it, because for the longest time, we felt that that was a weakness of people, that they are weak and therefore they get attached. But that's the human condition. We are built to get attached. We have an attachment system, because if we didn't have an attachment system, we wouldn't attach to our mothers, we wouldn't attach to our families, we wouldn't attach to our friends, we wouldn't attach to the world and the community. So there's no, there's an attachment system we all have. The problem is drugs of abuse hijack that attachment system. So let's take a look at each of these myths. Drug use equates to drug addiction, and that is completely, people use drugs, and people have used all sorts of drugs, whether alcohol, tobacco, whether it's betel leaf in some parts of the world, whether it's khat in some others, whether it's cocaine, whether it's heroin, whether it's opioids, whether it's benzodiazepines, whatever it is. There are people who use these drugs for recreational purposes. I forgot cannabis. We use cannabis, all these things. But not everybody who uses goes on to develop this condition called addiction. You may get harmed. In fact, most people who drink alcohol don't get addicted to alcohol, but most people who drink a lot of alcohol are the ones who land up with liver disease and problems like that. They're not addicted to alcohol. They happen to be heavy drinkers, but they are vulnerable to the effects of alcohol. They get cancers, etc. So it's not to say that I'm promoting drug use. It's to understand that addiction is one consequence of people using drugs, but there are other consequences. People lose money, people lose health, etc. The other myth that people have is that alcohol is not a drug. And in fact, it is one of the quintessential drugs. It affects the entire part of the brain. It goes everywhere. And it really is addictive in those who are vulnerable to that addiction. The idea that addiction is a moral weakness has been sort of disproved. It's an equal opportunity condition. It can happen to the best of us. It can happen to the worst of us, but it's a human condition. So, approaching it as a moral issue was the way we've got so many troubles in society, where it goes underground, where it becomes, people get incarcerated, and it doesn't fix the addiction. In fact, it potentially makes them more vulnerable to death if you do that. The other question is whether people have to hit rock bottom to recover, and that's not necessarily true. Early interventions have been known to work, and so people do talk about not hitting rock bottom, but there is no, everybody's bottom is different, so you don't know what it is. And the other thing is that people have to want to have treatment for it to be successful. Yes, it helps, but if the structures around do help the person get into care, sometimes that makes such a big difference. Because one of the things we say, all of us, it's a human condition, and it gets worse in substance use, is that we are all on the wrong side of our own eyeballs to see our behavior. And that's why we need each other to tell us what's going on. We may not be ready to hear it, but we can see things the other person can't see. The other big myth is that substance use or drug abuse is more common amongst minorities, and that's really patently not correct. And that, again, tobacco use is a habit, not a true addiction. And again, this is not correct. In fact, it is the #1 addiction that causes more death than alcohol, other substance abuse, HIV, hepatitis C combined, and motor vehicle accidents combined. So it's not a bad habit. It's a really addictive drug. And in fact, my career started treating people with heroin addiction, actually pregnant women with heroin addiction. And what I realized that I could help them stop heroin and get on to proper treatment, but I could never help them quit smoking. And smoking was the biggest determinant as to why they continue to be addicted and why the baby was also affected. So these are some of the myths. Addiction is addiction, and we need to understand it as a disorder of consumption. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a drug test for addiction. You can do a drug test on somebody, it'll show up a substance, but they could have used it. It doesn't mean they're addicted. It just means they have used it or been exposed to it. So addiction is one of those things we don't actually have a brain scan or any ways to define it. We actually have to make up criteria to define it. So it's a social construct with no clear boundaries and many different perspectives. So if you take, for example, and we use gambling has now come under the idea of addiction. If you take gambling, you have a real person who's got a multi-million-dollar portfolio, goes once a year and spends $5,000 in Las Vegas, blows it up and comes back, and then continues to live their life. Is that person addicted? Well, most people would say no, they just had a good time. On the other hand, a person who's making $40,000 a year, takes $5,000, goes off and blows that up, and then has consequences, chances are that person will be considered to be having an addiction. So the definition of addiction is defined by the social construct, and there are many different perspectives. But what is really critical, and many of you put that up, was there's the use of the drug or the behavior despite the harm that is being caused to that person, to the people they love, and the things that they care about. So what happens is it's in a values conflict. You know this person to be kind, gentle, giving, hardworking, etc., but the focus of everything is the drug at the expense of all the harm it's causing them, physical harm, mental harm, social harm, etc. The other feature that we often see in addiction is loss of control. So the person says, yeah, I promise not to drink, I won't use drugs, I won't shoot up, I won't smoke, whatever it is. But they just get exposed to one piece of it, and the next thing you know, they've lost control. Or they say, I'm going to be a social drinker, they go to a party and have one drink, but the next thing you know, they've had 40, and they can't remember what happened. So that other loss of control, that the brakes don't come on, is another feature. And then the last is that it starts now moving into a dysregulated motivational system whereby all that the person can think about is how to get the drug, use the drug, recover from the drug, and use the drug again. And at the expense of motivation for other things. So you'll see disregard to clothing and hygiene and work and other things like that. So the American Society of Addiction Medicine came up with a definition that we've been using, and I think it's a good one because it gives us a better picture of that elephant. One, addiction is treatable. So that's something to keep in mind. No matter how bad it looks, this is one of those conditions that sometimes things look completely hopeless and something happens and the person gets better and they can become completely functioning members of society again. So this is one of those mental illnesses that if well treated, that person can come back better sometimes than what they did going into the addiction. It is chronic. That means it occurs over time. And it happens not just because there's one spot you can point to in the brain, but there's these interactions. So our brains are not just, it sits in our head. We know more about the bottom of the ocean and the top of the moon and the surface of Mars than we know how our brain works. We're getting there. We're just starting to discover it. But what we do know is there are circuits, so connections, different parts of the brain connected to each other that control our behavior. And there's this interaction between those brain circuits, and I'll come to it in a minute. But there's also a genetic factor, the environment, and the individual's own life experiences that will determine whether this addiction develops, whether it gets better. So it's not one thing, as I mentioned, and that's why we're getting closer to seeing the whole elephant when we use this definition of addiction. But regardless of what's going on in the back end, the user interface, what you come across, what you see, is this is how it starts. Usually it starts in adolescence when the person is young. And they say, oh, I want to try, I want to use. And the person will use, they'll want it. They'll probably want it only when they go out or when they go out with friends. But over time, they essentially say, you know what, I don't miss it if I'm not going. They can go long periods without it. But periodically, they'll suddenly say, oh, it's getting to be Thursday or Friday. I crave using it. Or they get their paycheck, and now I'm getting a craving. So that craving now has to be satisfied. And so they start seeking it out. And so it goes beyond wanting. It says, I'm craving it. They use it. And that cycle continues. So that craving keeps coming at different times at increasing frequency. And then suddenly the person says, oh my God, I'm using a lot. I've got this craving. They try to stop. And then they say, I can't go without it. They wake up suddenly realizing, I have to have it just to function. And so this is that progression. And in some people, it can go really rapidly, from first cigarette or first drink to the first, intoxication, to the first bottle, to the second bottle, and having withdrawals can happen within a year. And often that is determined by genetic risk. So those are the kind of things that you can see. So another thing that happens because of this exposure to the brain has to adapt. Even though it gets pleasure, it realizes that this is not the normal state of the brain. And so the brain has mechanisms to develop tolerance to it. And society, unfortunately, tells people and lauds people for having high levels of tolerance. If somebody, you can really hold your drink, so you can really, you can smoke 2 joints a day or 3 joints a day or 4 joints a day, and you don't get high, and amazing. But actually, what it does is says that this person is tolerant to it. But what happens is they're not getting the same pleasure. So what happens is they start needing more and more of the drug. And they'll say, keep escalating how much they're getting to get that desired effect. So having a high level of tolerance actually predisposes you to getting addicted. On the other hand, when you stop, your body has adapted to this, got tolerant to it, and now suddenly it finds a deficit of the drug. And what happens is your body has to keep compensating. And so it leaves this imbalance completely. And when you have this imbalance, the person starts going into symptoms, and it makes them want to use again. So this physiological phenomena is something that is often apparent to people because withdrawal is quite readily apparent. The person is sweating or anxious, is agitated, is depending on the type of drug, could be vomiting, could have seizures, could have all these bad things happen. And so they come to the attention of others. And this is so uncomfortable that it causes them to go seek the drug to get rid of the withdrawal. Now, this complicated cycle is to show you how we look at these circuits or the connections between the different parts of the brain. So I know this is a complex slide, but just take a look, work with me for a second. If you can look at the front of the brain, that's the nose. So above the nose is this green part called the orbital frontal cortex. And what you have happen in addiction is you take a look at we're going to look at the green, the blue, and the red. So what starts happening in the blue, the person starts binging, starts using the drug. They get intoxicated, they feel euphoric, they start feeling good when they use it. And should they not use it, they don't feel that good. And so they use it just to escape that negative feeling. So they're no longer getting the good feeling, they're just escaping negative feeling. And unfortunately, when people are at that stage, that is when the drug is the most addictive. Not when you're seeking the high, it's actually when you're trying to avoid feeling bad. But also what happens with that is the person, as we mentioned, starts getting preoccupied and anticipated. And these green parts, colored green, that have to do with decision-making, which have to do with memory, which has to do with planning, and desires all start kicking in that push the person to use. And then what happens at a later stage is you start looking at the person uses the drug and they've essentially depleted their brain chemicals. So our brains communicate, the cells in our brain communicate through chemicals. And those chemicals are called neurotransmitters. So they transmit messages from one part of the brain, and that's how these circuits fire together. And there's also an electrical current that the brain generates. So what happens is when somebody puts a drug of abuse through their brain, what they're doing is essentially they're short-circuiting these circuits. Or in the case of cocaine, it's like putting a 220-volt current through a 110 system. So you get a jolt, you get a big high, you get euphoric. But then the recovery is all those nerve cells have been burnt out. So the person now feels reduced energy, reduced excitement, starts feeling depressed, anxious, and restless. And at the same time, the other systems are kicking in saying, I desire the drug and obsessed with, and so this person gets trapped in the cycle. So to put it very simply, and this is how I explain it to patients, once somebody is addicted to the drug over time, what happens, the hijack happens of the thinking part of the brain, the feeling part of the brain, the part of the brain that has to do with habit, the part of the brain that has to do with appetite, the part of the brain that has to do with attachment, and the part of the brain that has to do with stress. So, and each of these systems get ready to quit at a different time. They recover from the addiction at a different rate. So the person may be ready psychologically, may say mentally, yes, I've decided this is bad for me, I need to go for treatment, but the lower parts of the brain, subconscious parts of the brain aren't ready. And so they sabotage it. And this is why we call it a hijacked brain, because that person who is trying to do and trying to get a treatment is now unable to follow through because there's other parts of the brain are hijacking that process. And so treatment is for us to engage with those lower parts of the brain, either through medication, either through connection, and help that person understand that the decision-making process is under attack. And we have to help strengthen that decision-making process by quietening down this subconscious level that is driving the addiction. So that's why it's really important to understand this brain, because if we don't understand the brain, we attribute it to moral failings. So just to summarize, and I'm just going to try to make sure we are going to stay on time, is that addiction involves this physical part of dependence and psychological part of dependence. And that if you just simply detoxify people, it doesn't fix the addiction because these other parts of the brain continue to bring them back. So you can take, if you take somebody and detoxify from alcohol or tobacco or any other addictive drug in a week, and it takes about a week to detoxify, and then you don't do nothing else, at the end of 1 year, only 3% of those people will have stage stop. So withdrawal is necessary. Managing that dependence, that physical dependence is necessary, but not sufficient. And where you're trying to help is the person who is misusing and abusing that misapplication of the substance, and the sensitivity to it is what we are trying to address over time. So take a breath, and this is how a psychiatrist or an addiction doc like myself would diagnose somebody with a substance use disorder. The use of the drug itself, when somebody comes and says this person is using, and we take a look at it and say, okay, is it maladaptive? So for example, that person who gambles and once a year spends that money, that's not a maladaptive pattern. But somebody who steals from their employer, is stealing from others, getting money, mortgaging their home, doing that to just get that instant hit at the casino, that's maladaptive. So that maladaptive pattern of use that leads to tolerance. So the more they do it, the less it gives them enjoyment, and they have to keep doing more. Or if they don't do it, they get irritable, they get withdrawal, etc. So we look for those things. They're using more than they intended to use, and said, yeah, I'm only going with $50 to the casino, but they'll end up, getting their credit card out, and the next thing you know, they spent $10,000. Or somebody says, I'm only going to do a line of cocaine, and the next thing you know, they've done a line of cocaine, they've done methamphetamine, they've done all these drugs, and they've gone more than intended. There are unsuccessful efforts to cut down. Every time they try to stop, they go back. There's this compulsive desire to use, and their life revolves around the substance. They have cravings and urges, and they continue to use despite problems. So these criteria are about, all 11, but there are about 11 of these criteria there. Overall, we look at them, and that way we can know whether this person has a current substance problem or not. Now, I'm just going to quickly switch to something just to show you some Canadian data. Everybody is focused on opioids and other drugs, but if you take a look, what kills most Canadians is alcohol and tobacco. And this is what you're seeing. And so, we are not out of the woods. It's not to say those other drugs are not important, but overall, as a country that has a public health system, if we don't do something about the heavy drinking going on in society today, we are one of the heaviest drinkers in the world. We are going to have major problems, not just from addiction, but from the health effects of excessive alcohol consumption. And women are way more susceptible to all substance abuse, whether it's alcohol, tobacco, cannabis. Overall, women suffer more. And you can see with legalization, we are getting some better data, but it's leveling off. The use is staying around that 5% who use daily. So what we are seeing here is that these are the bigger drugs of abuse. And worldwide, if we really want to get our addictive, consumptive behavior under control, we have to really focus on alcohol, smoking, and cannabis. Okay, having taken you on this whirlwind, I also want us to pay attention to that what you consume today, whether it's a drug, food, anything you consume. In the middle, you can see this human behavior. What behavior you do today is because your environment has a balance of opportunities and constraints. So for example, if I am trying to recover from my addiction to alcohol, and I have an entire bar full of alcohol, and I live alone, my opportunity to drink has just gone up, and there are no constraints around me. On the other hand, if I have the problem with alcohol, but there's no alcohol in the house, and I have a loving family around me, and there's other things that are keeping me busy, like going to treatment and going to meetings, etc., my opportunities is that you are not going to engage in that behavior. But what is really interesting is we realize, okay, so you can create these constraints in your environment, you can have these opportunities. But what happened to you before determines how you respond to this. And this is why we are so interested in what happens pre-conception and in the early childhood years. Those are critical because traumas that happen to kids, or what we call adverse childhood experiences, will double to triple the chances that this person will develop an addiction. So if we don't take care of us across the lifespan, we are coming too late to trying to address an addiction. So that's my summary of addiction. It's a developmental biopsychosocial condition, and that's how we have to develop treatments for it. Okay, so we're moving quickly to the second part. This part I'm going to go quickly. We saw the beautiful boy, and I think I'm just going to skip this because I think you can see this later. But really, when people go into treatment, what does treatment look like? Treatment can be inpatient, it can be outpatient. Inpatient treatment is typically, in Ontario, it's free, and you can get, you can call something called Connects Ontario, we'll talk about that, and you can find out where treatment is available anywhere in the province. So you can do inpatient, you can do outpatient. Often we have an assessment, we manage the withdrawal, we assess and enhance the motivation to get better. We provide the treatment, which is, could be 12 weeks, could be 24 weeks, could be longer. But after that intense treatment, there has to be aftercare to prevent relapse. And typically you need more than one provider, and it needs to be biopsychosocial, as I told you before, because all these different systems are affected by the addiction. One of the key issues, remember I told you that if you're using drugs and you just detoxify people, they'll relapse. It's really high in the first few months, and by the end of a year, 97% have gone back. What we try to do with a combination of medications, combination of therapy, is to simply work on this. So we know that when you're addicted, addiction is occupying high salience, which means your mind and your brain is oriented towards that drug. What we are trying to do is compete with that and try to help that person adopt and find things to give them pleasure that go beyond what the drug gives them, healthy things. We try to quieten down this. We try to strengthen their inhibitory control so that they can say no, they can refuse to use drugs, they can plan, they can use that thinking part of the brain to help drive things. And we're trying to interfere with that automatic behavior, which is basically hardwired into the memory, where they'll remember, oh, it's so lovely to use. That's a distorted memory because they don't play that tape to the end where it actually all goes downhill. So we are really helping interfere with that automatic behavior and also counteract that stress response. That's what treatment involves, and it's a process because often people aren't ready to do all of it in one fell swoop. And so we have to engage them in each level of this kind of relapse prevention. So it's hard work, but it's doable. The other thing that happens is people quit and then they go about their environment, and then the next thing you know, they met their friend John, who they used with before, and he said, oh, you're looking great. Why don't you just come and have one line with me, no problem. And the person goes and has that one line or shoots up once, and they say, great, see, I used, nothing happened, I'm good. But what they're doing is they're waking up all those neurotransmitters in their brain to be ready for more. And so this is what happens. And so what we have to help people commit to is not a single use, if you can, and avoid it at all costs. And we give medications that can help them avoid a single use. But we know that, sometimes willpower is weak and it happens and you get tired and you have cravings. So you need other things in place as well. So, we often give medications that can help act like a protection. So should the person use, it doesn't give them the buzz or the high. And that way they don't go back into that behavior again. We also tell them to avoid people, places, and things that are associated with drug use for at least early parts of recovery, so they can actually not get triggered to use and not have the opportunity to use. And then we also help them manage stress in a healthy way so that they don't actually lead to using drugs. Because when you're stressed, all of us have this experience. We want comfort food or we want comfort. And if you've been addicted, the first thing that will come to mind is that drug. So that person has to learn another way of managing stress. Okay. So that is how treatment, and treatment is typically, what our goals of treatment there is you're getting person to stop, and there are milestones that you're trying to get them to achieve. You're trying to get them for getting 1 day without using. That's an indication that they've got a certain amount of motivation and willingness to make it happen. The next milestone is going 7 days without using. And if they can go 7 days without using, typically they're through the withdrawal stage. If they can go a month, they've pretty much softened the habit part of the addiction. And if they can go 3 months without using at all, nothing, then their chances of going back drop to less than 5%. It never goes back to zero because it got body memory, but it drops to less than 5%. And what happens is that they are now in a place to really focus on fixing their lives. So what we do is we break it up to help people meet these stages and help them get to that. Now, not everybody can do 3 months in a row, but you know what you have to help the person with to get to the next stage. And that's how we break it up for people. And that's the goal of treatment, that you can actually be in situations in which you would have used and you don't use at all. And under the worst circumstances of stress, and the best circumstances of stress, and the best opportunity to use, you no longer want to use. That's the goal. So, and therefore it takes several tries to help somebody get over an addiction, because it didn't start in one day. It's been going on for a few years. And so to reverse it takes a while. So be patient. So now the last part is what I'm going to spend time on: families, and how do you, as a bystander, try to help somebody. And so we start with what we shouldn't be doing, which is don't just say no, because it has done as much for substance abuse treatment as Have a Nice Day has done for treatment of major depression. We know that this does not work. And here's the thing, and this is a part of human behavior that we study, we see it all the time in our day-to-day lives, but it doesn't stop us from doing this. We want to butt heads with people. So what happens is we see the problem and we say something like, why don't you just? And you saw a little bit in that clip where the father was trying to say, and the more you tell somebody what to do, the less likely they're going to do it. This is a human trait. It just gets amplified in the face of addiction. And that is one of the things that we tell people to really avoid when you're working with a loved one, because the more you tell them, don't use, they'll use. The other thing that we ask family members is, you have in your head, you're trying to understand why. In your mind, you say, you had a great upbringing, we're lovely parents, we've done everything for you. Why are you using? As soon as you ask that question, why, the person has to justify why they're using. And paradoxically, that doesn't lead to insight. It just leads to justification. And so if you really want to understand where that person is, ask that person, what is it doing for them? Understand where they're coming to this addiction from. You're not condoning it, but you're understanding. And what happens is that person stops getting defensive. So the first thing we do is ask people to stop butting heads and getting into like your horns locking with the other person who's in addiction, because it doesn't work out for either person. You're left frustrated, they're left frustrated, and in fact, they're more convinced to use more. And you're more convinced that they're not going to get better. And it just creates further conflict, and you go back to your corner, and then you come back and butt heads again. And so we often invite family members and loved ones to not ask why and not tell the person what to do. And we'll get to how do you have that conversation in that case. So another concept is we want to make sure that people don't die while they are not ready to address their addiction. That's what happened. Then at the end of the day, this is not a new concept. This is St. Thomas More in Utopia talks about this. And this is sort of the way allopathic medicine is. We are not curative. We basically reduce the harm from whatever disease condition you have. I mean, if you have diabetes, we don't cure your diabetes. We help get your blood sugars under control so you don't get complications. You have high blood pressure, we don't cure your high blood pressure. We reduce your blood pressure so you don't land up with a stroke. So harm reduction is part of allopathic medicine, the fabric of allopathic medicine. But what does it mean when it comes to substances of abuse? We're basically saying we want to help this person not die. And how we talk to them is not by being pontificating. We are really not delivering strange and out-of-the-way speeches, because they're not listening, as you saw what happened in that clip, because they are firmly persuaded the other way. They've got the hijacked brain. And instead, by this indirect approach, you strive and struggle as best as you can to handle it tactfully. And thus, what you cannot turn to good, you must at least make as little bad as you can. And so that has been the origins of harm reduction. And if you look at it, that's where we're getting at. Help the person stay alive till they are ready to stop. So, on TV, you'll see this thing called, and doing an intervention, the whole family gangs up, and you have this person, and then everybody comes on them and just gangs up on them and sends them off to treatment. And it makes for great TV, but not great for the patient. What has been studied is something called CRAFT, which is Community Reinforcement and Family Training. And this is really meant for family members because it helps family members and friends understand how to help their loved one to change and for feeling better themselves. So as you said, you saw all that suffering and you talked about how much it is, that it's there. And it was developed by Dr. Rob Myers and Jane Ellen Smith at the University of New Mexico. And really, you see, when you're in this dynamic with somebody with an addiction, you go from either being detached, I can't do help anything, and you just pull back, or you confront. And so you're going between these two positions, which is pretty draining on you. So this idea is to have that middle ground, to feel comfortable, to feel supported, and to be able to be effective. And really, it combines the 12-step approach of Al-Anon, which is really something that's free, available in every continent, every country of the world, and traditional Johnson Institute-style interventions. So it is the most effective. And very quickly, what I'll tell you is, in this, what do you learn? You learn how to have that conversation, and I introduced you a little bit, is find out the story without asking why, so the person doesn't get defensive. Demonstrate understanding without judgment. It also helps the functional analysis of the substance use behavior. And for example, you may find out every time the monthly check comes in, there's substance use, or you may find out when there's conflict, substance use exists, or whatever it might be. It also helps, obviously when people are intoxicated using, there's a risk of domestic violence, so there needs to be, care, especially with the spouse trying to intervene here. That they don't end up coming up in, getting hurt themselves. There's communication training of how to have these effective conversations. Positive reinforcement training, which is meaning how to engage with the person only when they're doing the desired behavior. So for example, not engaging with the person when they're intoxicated, but clearly when any point in time where they show up sober, they show up listening, engage with them then. And so that's one example. Discouragement of using behavior. So you really talk about, look, I know you're going to use, but I would really not. I would prefer if you don't, those kinds of things. And then reinforcing your own self for what you're doing, because often families go through this, I just want to fix it. And that can lead to a lot of distress. And then, of course, having treatments ready, and that's why the resource we give you will be something functional. Now, this is a more medical side, but just basically trying to show you that when you compare all the treatments out there, you can see that the percentage of people entering treatment can get up to close to between 65% compared to doing just Al-Anon, which is 10%, or the Johnson view, which is 30%. So it is the most effective out there. The problem is that we don't have enough publicly funded centers in Ontario or Canada offering this. What we do have, and help develop this through ChemH, is a free online course that can be given anywhere. It's open to any family, and it's an education to build based on CRAFT on how to help manage these problems with the family member. And you can do it together with a loved one or as individuals, however you want to do it. It's a free course. There's also something called Families for Addiction Recovery, or FAR Canada, and there's free support to families. It's a peer-to-peer for families who've been through what you may be going through, and they can support you and guide you. For the more harm reduction, there's something called Mom Stops the Harm. This is more for people whose families have either died from use, and they're more street involved and using illicit drugs from the street, like fentanyl, and trying to just make sure that the kid doesn't die. And so they really provide this issues to this support, and they also have some policy work that they do. This is what's available in Ontario for smoking. For anybody, it's free. It's through my program. We offer it to anybody. They can just sign up, and it'll get mailed to them at home. And for example, these are the books that I was talking about. The CRAFT intervention program is for those who are more psychologically minded or professionally minded and have some psychological training. It's a good book to read. For the lay public, I would suggest getting your loved one sober, alternatives to nagging, pleading, and threatening. That is available on most booksellers. And I think there's an audio version, if I'm not mistaken. At CAMH, we also have these books that are called Family Scare, and I think periodically they're available for free download on the website, and you can see it. If you are in the Ontario or Toronto region, we have CAMH, which is a 500-bed hospital, 100,000 visits, the largest mental health and addiction facility in Canada, that and is also affiliated with the University of Toronto. Has a centralized intake for patient referrals. Patients can refer themselves, or they can be referred by their family doctor, and then they are scheduled to the right service. There's, for example, if it's an urgent issue, we have an at emergency room, mental health emergency room, they can show up. And if it's not that urgent, there's something they call a bridging clinic, which will get that person started into care. And for addictions, we have a rapid access addiction medicine clinic that people can get right away into care. So all of that is at CAMH, which is at Queen and Ossington. This is that information of Connects Ontario. If you're not in the GTA, or if you want more broad other treatments, it's free. 1-800 number, you can chat, you can call, you can email, and they can guide you or your loved ones, or if you're the loved one, can guide you how to help your loved ones about where to get help. So I went through that last beat in a whirlwind, and I think, thank you for your indulgence. I am going to now open up and look at the chat so that I make sure I answer what you brought up in the chat and answer some of those questions. But in the meanwhile, I'm going to make sure that that you use the Q&A and start typing questions in there. So I'm just going to address some of the things in the chat. So one of the things in the chat that Perry put in there is that when we hear recreational use of cannabis, people can start with one and then weekends and get addicted. Why is it labeled as recreational and government not controlling, as there are pop-up stores in most street corners? Your thoughts on controlling this? So I'll just, so I was just on a 5-member panel that reviewed the legalization of cannabis in Canada and what were the impacts from 2018 to now on society. So a couple of things have happened. One is that people getting criminalized for using drugs has dropped. So the effects of criminalizing people and putting them in jail and young people, especially not being able to then get their lives back on track, has dropped dramatically. What we have seen, though, is that youth cannabis has stayed stable, but young adult cannabis has gone up, and making Canada one of the largest, consumers of cannabis in the world by young people. And interestingly, when we are looking at other data of harms, the people who so the addictive potential of cannabis, of number of people who use cannabis who get addicted, is actually less than alcohol, much less than tobacco. But what are the harms from regular use of cannabis? So there's a small proportion of people, and this is the issue, we don't know who's going to get into trouble with this. There's a small proportion of people, especially young men, especially if they come from racialized or made vulnerable populations, at high risk of developing psychosis from cannabis. So one thing we are really trying to get people to understand is that delay cannabis use for as late as you can after the risk of brain vulnerability to psychosis has diminished. So that's one thing. We do need to do better. We do need better controls. For example, the commercialization of cannabis, where you'll end up having high potency gummies and those kinds of things, and unregulated pop-up stores selling all sorts of unregulated products. Absolutely, there needs to be better enforcement. There needs to be better ways of doing that. The issue is that now, with it being taxed, and the way it has happened is that the illicit sourcing of cannabis has gone from like 100% to less than 30% in some jurisdictions. So the criminal element is disappearing, and we know that's happening because the cost of cannabis is dropping. So legalization overall is good. We just need to figure out how to make sure young people delay their use of cannabis, and if they use cannabis, use it not daily, don't smoke it, don't use high potency cannabis, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of work to be done on how this could be controlled. I can tell you, in opening up treatment programs for people on cannabis, most people don't complete the treatment. There is treatment, but they don't come for treatment. Now, can addiction be completely cured? It depends on what you mean by cured. Your vulnerability, once somebody's addicted, their vulnerability to go back is always there. But it can go into a full remission where the person goes from not using at all, so we call that a remission, into what is often called a higher order recovery, where the person's life and quality of life is way much higher than when even before they started. So you do see that, and you can see a large percentage of people, as they age out, will age into those things if they don't die or come to harm, and if they engage in treatment. So yes, it is. That's why we say it's a completely treatable condition. Just like any relapsing condition, it can go in and out. I'm keeping a track on the time, but I'm going to ask my host to interrupt me when I need to stop going through the questions. But I'll do I'll do it. Is there a standardized question we can use for addiction? There's tons of standardized questions that clinicians can use that have been validated. There's ones that are more broad. There's something that can do like a good screener for all populations, all ages, called the GAIN SS short screener. It comes from the chestnut.org, and it scans for all mental health conditions, including addictions. And so that's one thing that's out there. And then there are specific ones, so a drug and alcohol use questionnaire, or something called the audit for alcohol. So there are tons of standardized questions for addictions. The important thing is what to do after that question is done. It shouldn't be used as a gotcha. It should be used as a way to help the person reflect and understand treatment. And yeah, so how many kicks at the can, depending when you look at tobacco addiction, if you look at the number of times people try to quit before they fully quit, it can be on average up to 30 times. So we often take a look at it. What does a full cure mean? We are looking at functionality and sobriety forever. And in some cases, it's opioids especially, medication-assisted treatment, which tricks the brain to be calm, the opioid receptors in our brain to be calm. The person doesn't have cravings. That is should be a minimum of 2 years of treatment before the person even thinks of coming off those medications. Because anybody who comes off sooner ends up overdosing and dying. And those are 2 medications that have shown if the person stays on it, they will be protected from overdose and death for the most part. So okay, so I'm just going to now thank you for all those questions, and I'm not going to answer the question about young men develop bulimia because that is over and above my expertise, but they are related but not the same. And I'm going to hand it over to Tina.
Your deep dive into addiction has really been an eye-opener in so many ways for me, and I'm sure for our audience as well. All of us have enjoyed the webinar interactive session that you have opened up, and I think all of us have enjoyed the chat. So thank you so much, Dr. Selby. Before we move on to the Q&A part of the webinar, please help us serve you better by answering this simple poll, which will only take a few seconds of your time. The first question is, how useful did you find this webinar? There are 3 choices: very useful, useful, not useful. The second question is, how did you learn about this webinar? Email from Trivo or Smita Chandra, Dr. Sudhi Devanesan, local library or community center, community organization, or other means. Do you intend to attend our upcoming webinar on diabetes or breast cancer? And the fourth, what different topics would you like us to present in the future? We always appreciate your feedback, and it helps us improve the quality of our webinars and the content we put out to help all of you in our community. Thank you so much, dear audience members. I would now like to invite Dr. Sudhi to moderate the Q&A session with Dr. Selby.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you so much, Peter. That was an outstanding presentation. I'm proud that I have been your supervisor for a research project when you were still a resident. You come full circle. Now I'm learning from you. Thank you, Peter. Actually, Peter, you've answered most of the questions that have come up already. But there are a couple of them that are kind of interesting. One is on vaping. A question about vaping is now getting more and more common among kids. And what are there any medical conditions that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. So vaping is an interesting thing. Kids could be vaping cannabis, or they could be vaping nicotine, or they could be vaping non-nicotine containing flavored devices. So very briefly, a vaping device heats a mixture of propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin with flavoring, and it either has nicotine base or it has something called a nicotine salt. And there are different versions in which they can get nicotine in that way. It's legal in Canada to sell a vape with nicotine as long as it has less than 5% nicotine, so 20 milligrams per mil. And vaping of cannabis sold in the Ontario cannabis store and across the country can have up to 90 to 98% THCA. That is the active ingredient. The THC is the active ingredient in cannabis. So it can have very high potency. So when somebody says they're vaping, we always find out, what are you vaping? Because if you look at some of the lung injuries that occurred in the US prior to pandemic, because of vaping, it was because people were using illicitly produced THC vapes that had vitamin E acetate in them. So those kids landed up with lung failure. There was one case in the US where the person needed a lung transplant. So essentially, that was attributed, but we haven't seen any more cases of that because as the product gets a little bit more regulated and legal, people are less and less likely to go and buy and make their own and do those kinds of things. So that's the thing to watch for. People land up with the vaping is very drying to the nose, so people, especially if they start exhaling the vape, the aerosol through their nose, they'll get dry nose and they'll have a nosebleed, or they'll be very thirsty all the time. Those are some of the risks. And the other risk, especially with vaping of nicotine, especially if it's the more discrete pod-based system, the most common one people have heard about was Juul, but that's not the most popular one. There are many others. They're very discrete. And why does it become so addictive is because people just continue to do it through the day. They just don't realize how much they're consuming, and they just keep going through the day. They can get addicted and they can get toxic because now they get too much nicotine because they don't regulate it. So those are the things to watch for. And in young people, because it's novelty, because it's there, then in schools, it becomes the thing to do. And you have to watch for, parents should watch for what their kids are using because they go into withdrawal, they go to nicotine withdrawal, and they may be irritable, anxious, and they need help. And so we have a clinic at CAMH, in my clinic, where we have an adolescent medicine physician and a pediatrician who does this work in addictions for vaping. So we see that range. One of the things I say, if you see a kid who's vaping and can't stop, there's a high likelihood that they're also using other substances and they have an underlying mental health condition going on. So, if you start seeing a young person in this day and age getting addicted to vaping, we're always looking for other conditions.
Thank you, Peter. I know we're running short on time, but there are several questions here regarding resources, information. I want to reassure the audience that will be on our website. The ones that you put up, we can duplicate them and put them on our website to be accessed. And one quick question is, you briefly alluded to genetics and addiction. Could you take a minute to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah. So there's no single gene that codes for addiction. There are different genes that code for different brain transmitters. So the way opioids work in the brain, the way dopamine works in the brain, the way your body the body handles other neurotransmitters. So that's the genomic side, we say. Then there's the way your body handles a drug. So if you rapidly metabolize a drug like nicotine or a drug, you're more likely to get addicted because you break it down quickly and you need more. So when we take a look at the genetics, there's no single gene, but collectively, genetics account for about 50% of addiction. So it's a 50-50. 50% environment, 50% genetics. Genetic is not deterministic. Just because you have a genetic risk doesn't mean you're definitely going to do it. What it means is you're at higher risk, so don't, take it seriously. That you're going to get a bigger buzz per drink. You're going to want to be able to drink more, and you need to really either not drink or have major constraints that don't put you at risk. So that's how we look at the genetics. There's no genetic treatment, there's no genetic changing, but we do know that these people are at higher risk. So they often say genetics, causes the trigger, and the environment pulls it.
That's right. Thank you, Peter. The other one was just a comment and something that we as physicians are also very aware of. Do you call out a colleague or a friend if you know they're getting into trouble? And I think that's an ethical question, and how you do it and how you handle it is a very delicate situation.
Absolutely.
But it was raised as a question. When you know somebody is in trouble, do you approach them? Do you not? What do you do? Just a very quick answer to that, Peter, and then
very quick. I know in time. So first of all, make sure it's safe to do the conversation. Have the conversation in a private place where they are safe, when you're safe. Have the conversation when they are not intoxicated, or and what you should do then is, with permission, say, I'd like to have this conversation. Here's what I noticed. I noticed on that and that day when you spoke in a loud voice, you describe the behavior, then say, this got me wondering, it could be because of the drinking, and I am concerned about what is happening to you. So you're making a behavioral observation that is irrefutable, you're interpreting it, and then you're expressing what it does for you. And then you can ask that person, would you like any help? You can't force people to get better, but typically these are the ways in which we have those difficult conversations with somebody who is going downhill. You can see it, wrong side of the eyeballs, remember we said? So you could just let them know your intention is not to judge, not to scare them, but to do this in that way. And sometimes they're not ready. And there's a question there about what to do if they're aggressive. Absolutely be safe. Do not engage in this when somebody's intoxicated, because behavior is erratic.
Thank you very much for that answer, Peter. And thank you very much once again for giving us such a wonderful talk today. Again, this will be back on the website, so it will be accessible. So we'll hand it back to Tina right now. Thank you very much.
I noticed that, if I can just say, Dr. D, first of all, thank you, but I noticed that there are questions there. If you want me to send them to me, I'm happy to send a written response.
No, they were sent to me, Peter. Those are the questions that were sent to me.
Okay, on the question answer, I can see some other questions. We never answered all of them, but if you want me to answer them offline, I'm happy to get back to you and your audience.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, audience, for your questions and comments and active participation. Thank you, Dr. Selby, for your insights, and thank you, Dr. D, for moderating the Q&A. For our audience members, we'd like to remind you that the Zoom link will be available shortly of the webinar recording, so you could watch this webinar once again. I would now like to invite our illustrious leader, Smita Chandra, to say a few words. Welcome, Smita.
Thank you, Tina. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending the webinar today. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Dr. Selby, for your informative and wonderful interactive presentation. Thank you, Dr. D, for introducing us to a new word. Our vocabularies grow with every webinar. Our executive team works really hard to bring you these informative webinars, and I would like to thank each and every one of them. Our charming MC, Tina Walia, for graciously hosting the webinar and creating this beautiful slideshow. Sridhar Rao for tech and Zoom support and his always savvy advice. Dr. Asha for disseminating our flyers, extending our outreach, and connecting with many community organizations and libraries. Ashima Jain for seamlessly running the slideshow tonight and for helping with the promotions. Eshna Roy for creatively designing our flyers and slides to make them bold, beautiful, and eye-catching. A very special thanks to our ambassadors, Roisin and Paul O'Hara, who have tirelessly helped distribute our flyers within our community. And thank you, dear friends, for your support, attending and promoting our webinars. We are always grateful for your enthusiastic participation. We would love your feedback about how we're doing and what you would like to see in future webinars. If you have enjoyed our presentation and would like to support us, please donate to our outreach through our website at www.trevo.org. Thank you for spending the evening with us. I am now going to hand it back to Tina.
Thank you very much, Smita. On behalf of the webinar outreach wing of the Ripple Effect Wellness Organization, I would like to sincerely thank you all for attending the webinar tonight. See you at our next webinar in September. Looking forward to more April showers and May flowers.